Hey folks, David Stewart here. I would like to talk about a book today. Not a new book, but a little bit older book. Here it is, Elric of Melnibone by Michael Moorcock, a classic of the fantasy genre. And I want to take some time on the channel here and there to talk about some classics, and this is one of them. And the reason for that is that I think it's good to know where things sort of develop from, and I also think that these things are worth reading in and of themselves, and they're unfortunately often overlooked by a lot of modern audiences because they're not new, and there's a bias towards sort of what's new. And also, if you're marketing books, you're usually trying to push out what's new, so the marketing direction is always towards new stuff and not older classic stuff. So it's good to give these a little bit of exposure. If you are getting a little bit tired of the current fantasy literature landscape and the style, especially the style of those books being sort of highly detailed and long and about characters, then this can be very refreshing. So if you're kind of tired of whatever you're reading, it's good to go back and read something from a little bit different period, because it's going to have a profoundly different style, different goals, different aesthetics. Everything about it's going to be different, and that can be very, very refreshing. So I do recommend this if you haven't read it yet. If you haven't read Elric of Melnibone, it is a classic. There's a lot of things I like about this. I actually originally read this in a different edition, but I saw this version at the used bookstore and I just had to get it because it's the 1976 DAW version, and it just kind of speaks to everything that Elric is to me. You know, it's got the yellowed pages. This book has sat on somebody's shelf for a long time. It's not very thick, so it kind of looks like a Pulp Fiction book. And of course, it has this great typography from the 60s and 70s and the beautiful illustrated cover. Inside, there's also illustrations. There's these great kind of lithograph type illustrations that are kind of printed on. They look great. They're throughout the book, and I think they really add a lot. I love illustrated covers. I think they speak a lot to me. Unfortunately, they're kind of out of style. In fact, I have another one here from the 70s that I like a lot, Children of Dune. Not the book as much as the cover, right? But I love the typography. I love all the curvy letters. I like how hand done it looks. I like the fact that it's a painting, and it looks kind of mysterious. It doesn't say a lot, but you're like, I wonder what's in there. And here we have a very heroic image of the main character Elric, and similar typefaces on both, right? And they just kind of say 60s or 70s, and 60s or 70s to me means not just older, but also a time of risk, and when these genres are really developing in lots of new, different, cool directions. So I really am a fan of stuff that was put out in the 60s and 70s, and I do recommend that book at least. Now, if you want to compare this to like a modern book, this is a modern DAW book, Name of the Wind. This one's a lot thinner, and this one is a lot thicker, and even not just thicker, but like the words are smaller and go out to the edge of the page more. But if you just look at these covers, like I miss illustrated covers, and I wish I could make books with illustrated covers, but unfortunately they're very out of style now. Even in the fantasy genre, they're starting to go out of style. And this is a great example why. This is actually a really, really cheaply done book cover. You could actually do this book cover in Photoshop like in an hour, if you know what you're doing, maybe less. But it's 3 photos that they just kind of melded together and then put some words on top of, rather than this, which is a whole painting. Somebody took a lot of hours to very in great detail paint this portrait of Elric, and then somebody hand did the typography in order to create this publication. So I like this. I'm not as big a fan of this cover for sure. And what it is you have a bunch of stock photos, and I'm gonna get a little closer so you can see really clearly. You have a dude in a robe who's just literally pasted onto the background. You can kind of see the edges of this savannah. So you have an image of a savannah and a stock photo of a dude in a black robe, and then you have clouds, and you just kind of meld those together. Then you put some typography on the front, and you have the R is different than the Othfus, and the P is different, but otherwise they're it's just a standard serif font. This W says Adobe Garabon to me. But you just kind of make the letters a little bit different, and then all of a sudden out comes a really cool looking modern cover. But it's actually a very, very cheaply done cover. I want to point that out. I've spent a lot of time the last couple months, by the way, researching covers and how to make them, and what sort of the modern trends are. There's a guy you can check out named Derek Murphy, who does a lot better explanations of how to do this sort of stuff than me. So I don't think I'm going to do videos on how to make like little Photoshop book covers. But I feel confident that I could actually make a similar cover to this if I really wanted to, and probably do it for free without having to use Photoshop. But you could check out Derek Murphy. Just Google him or type him into YouTube, and he's got a lot of stuff on how to make book covers. He's designed a lot of indie book covers that are out now that are modern and very eye-catching, and they're done this way, which is sort of melding photos together. And I actually don't think this is a particularly well done photo cover even. I think there's better ones out there. I think Derek Murphy does better ones than this. But I thought I'd point this one out, and I'll talk slightly more about this one in comparison to this as well. So that's the appearance. The appearance to me says a lot, and I just want to take a minute to talk about like how cool I think the 60s and 70s stuff looks and feels. You'll notice that this book is not very thick. It's a rather light book, which is great. That means that you can take a chance on it and read it in one sitting. There's lots of used copies, like I said, out in the world that are worth picking up. It's in a very, very different style compared to modern literature. Most modern literature, literature that's happening now, contemporary literature, it's written in a much more what I would call realist style. And a realist style means you talk about things that are mundane. And a lot of people like that. They like the detail of the realist style. Like there's a lot of detail in this book, in Name of the Wind, versus Michael Moorcock. Has a lot less detail sort of in each individual scene. You're not going to talk about how somebody uses the bathroom or what they eat for dinner. You're going to skip over all that stuff, and you're going to just have the story and just have the plot points in this. This is closer to what I would call an idealist style. Not really a romantic style. That's something different, but an idealist, a little closer to an idealist style. It's his own thing. He still writes like this, and I think it's great. If you want to read a book that just has a lot of story and never bores you, then Michael Moorcock's books are a great choice for that, because it's all story. There's very little time spent with people just sitting around talking. So you get through the points of the plot very quickly, and you'll never really be bored of Michael Moorcock's books, which is more than I can say for like this Patrick Rothfuss book, which has a ton of detail. Like if Patrick Rothfuss were to write the events of this book, the plot of this book, which is very thin, it's 160 pages, I think, 160 pages. Then it would be like 3 of these books. That's how much stuff is contained in this. It's a very what I call condensed style, and I'm a fan of condensed style. I still write in a more modern style, but I still try to keep things a little more brief than a lot of stuff. If Robert Jordan had written this book, it would be like 3 books long of Robert Jordan's books, which would be very long and in some cases very boring. But just an aside, Robert Jordan didn't always write in the style of Wheel of Time. He did write Conan adventure stories that are more in the tradition of this, just as a by the way. But if you were writing in the Wheel of Time style, it'd be like several books long, because that's how much events are in this. And I kind of like that. Lots of people, I think the reason the realist style is very popular now is simply because people really like to get to know characters, and in a realist style, you're going to really get to know characters because you're going to have them talking and doing things all the time. You're going to learn the ins and outs of like what they do on a daily basis, which makes you feel more connected to them. I think that there's a fine line, and I think it's really easy to go over that line into the boring territory. And you guys who've read Wheel of Time, I know that there's like whole books that it's just like, this book is really boring. Like nothing's happening. So it's really easy to cross that line and get into the territory where you're doing nothing but having, characterization, and you're not having any events, any sort of plot events, and then it gets to be boring. So overall, that's the great refreshing thing about this. Let me talk a little bit about what's in it. We'll do my standard thing: setting, characters, plot. So setting is what Michael Moorcock called the Old Kingdoms. That's part of his what he calls the multiverse, which is really cool. The multiverse includes our world, and he was one of the first people to really do that concept. Stephen King has also done it, but Michael Moorcock's version of it I like I like probably better. So Old Kingdoms is one of those worlds, and basically there's all of these young not Old Kingdoms, young kingdoms. So the young kingdoms are all the human kingdoms, and in the center of them is this island called Melnibone, where Elric is from, and there's this race of quote non-humans. We're not quite sure how they're non-human, but we just know that they're not quite human, who used to rule the world, and they ruled the world for like 10,000 years because they were empowered by like the lords of chaos, these dark gods, to rule the world. And then eventually like their empire collapsed, and now they just live on their island, and they are not a very moral people. They don't view like philosophy of ethics as anything worthwhile. And Elric, we talk about the character of Elric. And by the way, before I move on to the character, the world's very fantastical. There's lots of good locations. There's desert locations. There's all your standard fantasy locales, but always with like a little bit of a twist. Michael Moorcock really makes those places feel like they're alive with their own little culture in a very short amount of space, which is not easily done. But Elric, the primary protagonist in this, is very different from his contemporaries, the people that are around him. He's the emperor of Melnibone, and has inherited that title, but he doesn't think like the other people. He is always considering what is morality, what is ethics, what about philosophy, what can we learn from the young kingdoms, whereas everybody else is more concerned with their own pleasure, with like conquest, with returning Melnibone to greatness. And Elric does want to serve those people. He wants to return Melnibone to greatness, but he doesn't want to do it through like a pact with the dark gods like the old people did. And he's also an albino. And so those of you who've read the Witcher stories or played the Witcher games, think of that. I think Geralt of Rivia is rather inspired by Elric. In fact, years ago, Michael Moorcock was very upset when the Witcher games came out because he thought it was just Elric. I don't think Geralt has anything to do with Elric. I think they just both have white hair, and so there might be a little bit of inspiring there. But Elric's an albino, and he has basically a huge health deficiency, and he requires these like magical drugs that he has to take all the time, or his blood will fail him and he'll die. So he's always constantly on the brink of death. And this story details how he acquires a very famous sword in fantasy called Stormbringer, which is featured in a Blue Oyster Cult song called Black Blade, who Michael Moorcock wrote the lyrics for. He also wrote stuff for Hawkwind and Blue Oyster Cult, by the way. So very interesting guy. Born in England, now lives in Texas, I believe. So the black sword, which you can see on the cover, that's Stormbringer. It will sustain Elric. It will give him life and energy and vitality. But it's a soul-drinking blade. It constantly craves the souls of people, and he takes their souls by killing them. So obviously, you guys who've read Muramasa know that I wrote about a sword that has its own bloodlust to it, its own desire to kill. In Muramasa, that's actually an older idea, and comes from this idea that Muramasa blades, especially during the Edo period in Japan, had their own bloodlust. That once they were sheathed, they had to taste blood, and you would kill yourself with the blade if you couldn't find anyone to kill with it. There was like lots of little legends, lots of little bits of folklore that you can get out of that period with that. So this is not a particularly new idea, but I think it's a great implementation of that idea, which is the idea that you are balancing your own need against another sentient sword that desires only chaos. Elric is also very conflicted. I mentioned he's concerned with morality and with ethics. He ends up, of course, always torn between loyalty to his people, who are essentially very corrupt, and loyalty to his ideals, which are more virtuous. And he ends up being caught up in the conflict between the Lords of Chaos and the Lords of Order. And the extremes of both of those are bad, and he's constantly trying to find the balance. And often his attempts at virtue go awry, and he harms people around him, sometimes unintentionally, sometimes as a result of his own bad choices and his own shortcomings. He is often described as an anti-hero. So you hear the term anti-hero come up. Often you'll talk about Elric when you are thinking about anti-heroes, because not because he is evil. Nowadays, anti-hero often means someone who's like straight up evil and is the protagonist, or just a darker character. But he's a character that doesn't have those traditional heroic qualities. You know, he's not super virtuous. He's not super brave necessarily. He's kind of conflicted with himself. He's not that confident. He's he hovers over the edge of death all the time because of his own weakness. He's a very interesting character for that reason. So he's the prime character. There's other characters that serve basically alongside of him. The main antagonist is his cousin, who wants to be emperor and plots the overthrow of Elric. And then he also has his love interest, Cimmeril, who's kidnapped by his cousin and is the sister. He's also the sister of his cousin, so he's in love with his cousin. Elric is anyway, and so that drives the plot forward as well. And both of those characters are a little more static, and they kind of serve to illustrate who Elric is more than be three-dimensional in and of themselves. But they have their own little qualities to them that really help Elric become the central character of this. The plot, like I said, there's a ton of plot in this. There's more story in this than there is in this, by a lot. And the plot occurs very quickly. It's very sweeping. It takes place across lots of different landscapes. It takes place on sea. It takes place under the ocean, even on land. There's magic. There's sword and it's a sword and sorcery kind of thing. And you'll never really be bored by the plot. And I don't want to give away all the plot details in case you haven't read it, but it flies through that plot very quickly, and it is quite an adventure. The plot, I think. There's these things that sort of repeat with the plot, is that you have a buildup of tension, and then basically Elric fails at something and is saved by somebody else, and then is able to continue his journey in several different occasions, all the way until he eventually gets to claim the Black Sword Stormbringer for himself. So I do recommend it, and I think it is a good idea to talk about classic literature from time to time. If you haven't read the Elric books, go pick one up. You could probably find one at a used bookstore. I'm sure you could find them on Amazon for a fairly inexpensive price, because there's a lot of them out there and a lot of different editions. I like there's several different revisions, actually. I mean, he's revised his work a lot. I like the 1976 version of this. There's older versions from the 60s, including one called The Dreaming City. I have read The Dreaming City. It was originally published, I think, serially in 4 different parts as part of some sci-fi magazine. I don't remember which. I've read both. I like this version better, so my vote is for the slightly larger version, although it is still quite slim. So there's that. I thank you very much for watching. Please let me know what you think are your classics from the genre. Other people have mentioned Books of Amber. I'll talk about those because I never got around to reading them, and I read them recently, or started reading them recently. I haven't finished all of them, so I'll talk about those at some point. And some other ones, and I'll even talk about Dune and other fun IPs and what I think about them. But I appreciate you watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you would like to support the channel, I don't have a Patreon up. Maybe I'll get that going at some point. Buy my book. I really appreciate buying the book. And if you read the book, please leave a review to help other people decide if that book is going to be for them. I want you to be part of the good consumer sphere in providing information for people so they can make relevant decisions with their money. My book's only 99 cents. It's on Amazon. It's linked below, and I really, really appreciate it if you read it and enjoy it. Please let me know what you think about it. And also, if you find typos, let me know. This is, I just put it out. I did copy editing myself, but there's always going to be things that you miss. So I'm always appreciative of any kind of pointing out of typos. Have a great one, and I will see you next time.